Hi, I'm Dr Ursula Hackett, author of Brilliant Essays, your practical guide for university essay writing success. Welcome to my special video series on dissertation writing. This video is about matching your methods to your question. Dissertation writing is fundamentally a creative process. You're crafting an original piece of scholarship, gathering and processing your own data, and presenting fresh results. You might be a bit apprehensive about breaking new ground in research. And that's understandable, because it's a risky process. Your experiments might fail, your statistical analysis might not reach significance, you might not manage to collect as many survey respondents as you'd like, documents you hope to find might not be available in the archives, you might be just plain wrong. That's scholarship. It's rewarding in part because it's risky. If there was no way you could be wrong, if you advanced only anodyne or unfalsifiable propositions, then you wouldn't be really arguing anything at all, and nobody will be interested in what you have to say. The inherent risks of research mean that you've got to have a backup plan in case things don't go well, and you should put as much preparation as possible into your data gathering to reduce the chances of things going wrong in the first place. Your research methods will be discipline specific, but whatever your subject, it's all about finding the Goldilocks formula, a method that's not impossibly ambitious, but which has enough power to persuade your reader that the conclusions you draw are true and correct. Your method needs to be both powerful and feasible. First, feasibility. Your dissertation needs to be something that hasn't already been done, at least in that way or in that context, but which could be done with the resources and time you have available. Ask yourself, what can I do realistically? It would be lovely if you had unlimited money and time and no irksome ethical considerations to think about. Then you could found two identical city-states, randomly assign people to live in one or the other, subject one to a tyrannical government, and check in over several centuries to see how they're getting on. But you can't. Your research needs to be feasible. Fielding a large-scale survey is eye-wateringly expensive, but there are existing survey datasets you can use. It's also costly to travel to archives. Can you find what you're looking for online, arrange an interlibrary loan, or ask a librarian to scan specific material? Do you have permission to access the documents you need? If you're planning interviews or focus groups, think about the cost to yourself and to your participants, both in time and money. Consider how you'll recruit participants and the ethics of your proposed method. Any specific practical questions you have are best directed at your supervisor, but you can give yourself a head start in those conversations by moderating the ambition of your research plans. Let's say you're interested in the relationship between people's socioeconomic situation and their support for redistribution. If you had an enormous research budget, you could design some interesting experiments to test the determinants of attitude formation. For instance, wouldn't it be cool to craft a field experiment where you randomise participants' local exposure to inequality by parking high-status cars in their neighbourhood and see if that exposure increases their support for redistribution? But you're unlikely to have spare 50 grand for a posh car, plus a petitioner's wages and other costs. That would be too ambitious for a student dissertation, plus it's already been done. So instead, you might conduct a cheaper online conjoint experiment where you present participants with fictional election candidates with different views on redistribution, say. Or you could conduct statistical analysis of existing survey data on attitudes towards redistribution to find out how redistribution preferences vary across welfare regimes. Or you might use your knowledge of game theory to produce a formal model grounded in political economy that explains the relationship between class and redistributive preferences. Or you could turn to qualitative approaches and conduct in-depth interviews or focus groups to dig down into what ordinary people really mean when they talk about fair taxation or redistribution. There are so many possibilities. A glance through the main research articles in your field will give you a good idea of the various methods scholars employ to examine similar questions. Think about what they're doing. Could you do something similar within the constraints of time, cost, and your existing skill set? By all means, think big when you're designing your research, but remember always to keep feasibility in mind. Okay, let's say you've jettisoned the crazy pie-in-the-sky, if I had £1 million, 10 years and a Rolls-Royce research designs, and you think you've got something much easier to execute. A little online survey, say, maybe a few interviews, some easily downloadable data sets, some documents. That's where you need to think about the persuasiveness of your research method. Although your examiner will make due allowance for the fact that this is a student dissertation, not an established professor's bid for eternal glory, you've still got a burden to carry, answering your question and persuading your reader that what you argue is indeed true. You can only do that if your research method actually matches your question. It would be too easy to simply say, well, I like my methods class on visual ethnography, so I'll do one of those. Or I've got a lot of railway enthusiasts in my family, so I'll survey them and do something on trains. Or archival research seems easy, so I'll give that a crack. It's fine to follow your interests, but you need a clear, defensible research strategy rather than ad hoc arrangement. You don't want to gather a few bits of information just because it's convenient or seems easy. You must match your method to your research question and ensure that the information you acquire is substantial enough to answer that question. That might mean gathering one sort of data or triangulating between several different sorts. For instance, your dissertation on favouritism in political procurement in the United States will most likely require statistical analysis of large databases of federal contracts and spending. Your dissertation on gender and power in mid-20th century sporting events might require access to historical newspaper reports, contemporaneous writings, and perhaps also participant interviews. Whatever you do, make sure you do it properly. If you're going to gather survey data, design your survey carefully and think about sample size and techniques rather than just asking a few friends. If you're doing archival work, plan in advance and ask resident librarians for help rather than taking a scattershot approach. If you're doing a case study, consider how extensive an evidence base you'll need to really rule out alternative explanations and how you might triangulate between different evidence sources. Bottom line, don't just choose the research method you happen to know something about or which seems easy, impressive sounding or convenient. You need to find the right fit between method and question. That means taking a Goldilocks approach. Adopt a method that's not impossibly ambitious, but not superficial and flimsy either. Your method should yield enough evidence to persuade your reader and really answer your question.